drawn to something because it's glamorous, in the first instant, is not a bad thing. It opens the door for you. Then if you do it a few times, then you get to realise, I think there's more to it than this. And this feels a bit fake, having to wear this particular outfit for, blah, 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 blah. And that's not necessarily right. It doesn't necessarily need that. Then you start questioning. If you start questioning and then say to yourself, well, all of this is not really necessary, I can still make it work without this, but I really enjoy doing that, then that's good. That's fine, because you understand the dressing is something that works for you and that feeds you. Everyone needs something, and that's it. If you believe that the glamour is it, then that's not being a magician. That's dressing up. So you see how complicated it is, and you can see how I often put my foot in it and get into trouble, end up pissing people off, because these are all sacred cows. Everyone has their sacred cows. And there's nothing wrong with having sacred cows as long as you realise what it is and why it is a sacred cow to you, what it's feeding you and what it's holding you back from. When you realise that, and all of that comes again from paying attention, once you realise that and you can separate that out, you can say, right, I'm a ceremonial magician because I need all of this stuff, not to make the magic work, but because it puts me in that place and that works for me. That's good. I don't need all of that. I grew up in theatre. I grew up in the Catholic Church. Between those two, I just cannot be dealing with the outfits, the whole scripts thing, everything like that. It's too natural for me, is magic. I do work within structure, work within directional structure. I use tools. But, for instance, my altar can be a pile of books with a cloth on it and a candle. It's a working altar. I take it apart and scatter the magic afterwards. So that has its uses as well. So, no, I'm not a ceremonial magician. There's just no easy box to put me in because I use what would be erroneously called shamanic stuff. I use visionary stuff. I use contacted writing. I use sigils. I use scripts, as in not reading scripts, as in different types of writing. I work with substances, with plants, with spirits. I basically work with everything. In fact, I once worked with a washing machine.
You once? Okay, now I must know, Joseph. You can't just throw that out there and expect me not to ask that. I must know about the washing machine.
Are you still awake? Yes, you're awake, right? Washing machine. Where I live is pretty wild. Not as wild as certain wild places in America, but wild for England. And a lot of ancient stuff around here. There's remains around here that go right back into Neolithic times. And we get power tides that come through. And of course, because I'm running the school and I tend to piss a lot of people off because I'm a mouthy bitch, I often get stuff thrown at me magically by various groups and people who've taken the huff for one fucking reason or another. Most of the time, it's not a problem. It's just like, whatever, dude, wipe it off, carry on what you're doing. When you get everything all coming together at the same time, it can cause a bit of an atmosphere and it can be a bit difficult to hold it back. And this is a totally different conversation for another time that, sometimes when magical attacks come in, taking them apart and everything else is not necessarily necessary. If it's fragmented enough when it comes in, basically you just change the frequency of the house and it all falls apart anyway. And I'd had some various type of chant going in the house, and I had gates open and blah-de-blah. At the time, my stereo was having a problem and it was buzzing. My stereo's from the 1980s. I love it to death. And it was buzzing and I couldn't figure out why, and I found out eventually it was the cord at the back was too long. So I had these chants going and eventually it started buzzing and the buzzing was annoying me. And I thought, oh, God, but I need this frequency to keep going. So I thought, I know, my washing machine often sounds weird in the frequency of this particular set of chants. So what I did was put the washing machine on, put a load of washing in, do housework while doing magic, and turn the stereo off. And the thing with chants, when you have chants on repeat for hours on end, it carries on playing in your head for a good few hours afterwards, which is what it's supposed to do. So it was going on in my head, and the washing machine was sort of making the same sort of noise. So it was boosting the chant in my head, which was in turn fragmenting everything as it was coming in. It was just pushing it back out again. And that's washing machine magic. And it all worked, and it was fine. Got a peaceful night's sleep. Everything was gone the following morning. It's like, and those poll groups that had been throwing stuff must have been working on that shit for a long time. But it's like, if you're going to throw magic at someone, know your shit and at least construct it decently. But yeah, the washing machine will take care of it.
Effectively, Josephine, you've achieved for years a very, very highly personalized, specialized way of doing things, which should be how everyone should do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, if you get two magicians that are exactly the same, that's not good. It just doesn't work. You are an individual. You are the universe that you live in. Not in an egotistical way, just in a practical way. You are literally the universe that you live in. Your path is your path. Learning as you go along that path can come from so many different places, not just from magical training and magical books. It comes from everything that happens around you, everything that lives around you. Once you know, but you have to start somewhere. So you start somewhere, with a book or a couple of books and doing practical things, or with a course. That's why I wrote Quarry. It's right from the beginning all the way through, but it's all practical. You do the shit so that every magician that comes out the other end of it will all be completely different. They'll all approach their magic in a different way. There'll be some foundational stuff that's the same so that they can talk to each other because they've got the same vocabulary, but their actual magic will be completely different because you are an individual. And for some people, they'll go through, I'll do 2 years of this. That's not right. I'll go over there for 2 years. Okay, I've got everything I need from that. And that's just fine. People go, oh, you shouldn't do that. If it's what's working for you, then it's working for you. Don't go by what other people tell you. You make your own decisions. You make your choices. You live with them. You learn from them. You learn just as much from doing the wrong things as you do from doing the right things. Your mistakes are vital. Making mistakes and recognizing that you've made a mistake and seeing the consequences of that mistake and standing up to those consequences and riding them out for as long as it takes is the best training in magic you can get.
Let's kind of delve into that about practical advice and magical training, because as you mentioned, Josephine, when it comes to Quoria, and I would definitely encourage listeners, I know so many of you already have, or are in the process of taking the course, but you mentioned that the first step before anything is, kind of tuning out, separating, getting that healthy space needed before you even begin working on yourself. But Josephine, when it comes to Quoria, what are some of the other things if people are hearing this and they're like, okay, I'm sincere, I want to start this, but before they even step on the magical path, what are the kind of vital things that you would really make sure that they have their shit together before jumping on?
You're not going to have your shit together before jumping on. This was a mistake that was put down in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, when psychology first popped up, is that you had to have your shit together before you did magic, which is true, but it's also misunderstood. When you're first starting in magic, you're not going to have your shit together. Magic puts your shit together. You don't go for therapy before starting magic. That's going to do nothing for you. And, if people say, well, why are you saying that? Look the fuck around you at these, look at the magical, for fuck's sake. Really? You telling me they've all got their shit together? I don't fucking think so. You're a toddler. And recognize that you're a fucking toddler, and you start and be open to that. And that you're an asshole. Be open to that. You're a human being. We're all toddlers. We're all assholes. We all have baggage. We all fuck up. Okay? So, you starting magic with that. The first thing you learn to do is shut the fuck up. And you do that by learning to meditate. And it's really hard. Meditation is not easy, and you're not going to be able to do 4 lessons of it and you've got it. It's lifelong. So understand that you're going to have a struggle with it for years, and that you have to learn to make it work for you in the way that works for you. Some people can meditate for half an hour. Some people can boast because their assholes are going, oh, well, I meditate 6 hours at a time. Well, what do you do for you? That you 6 hours a day that you can sit and meditate. I've got a fucking job and kids. If it's 3 minutes that you sit there in total silence and just you focus on one thing, you do a meditation exercise and you do that every day, that is doing you far more than beating yourself up about how you're not a good Buddhist or how you're not a good meditator or anything like that. Just learn to shut up because you get bored. Then your mind starts to monkey. That is a lesson. You need to learn what your brain does, how it works, how you work. And you also need to learn how external influences influence your subconscious, your mind. And you won't experience that until you try to meditate and have the monkey mind. And then, have the bad dreams because you've been watching bad movies, or that how your imagination, when it's bored, suddenly starts going into zombies and apocalypse. That's your internal narrative that your magic is going to spring from. But you don't realize that until you shut up. That's how you start working on yourself, not by paying somebody else, say some therapist who's probably as fucked up as you are, if not more. You start from there. And then you move on to the next thing while carrying on doing that, whether it's 3 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, whatever. Then you move on. You don't get that perfect. You've started a ball rolling. Now you need to start the other ball rolling. So you move on and you start to practice another skill. And then you move on whilst practicing those other 2 skills. And each one of those foundation skills that you learn is there to make you aware of you, your environment, your mind, your subconscious, and to teach you how to pay attention. You can't do any magic until you can do that. But saying that, doing those things is magic. It is magical. Sitting there, learning how to use your mind, your imagination, by, in your mind, walking around your own house, in your head, is magic. It's a magical skill, and it's the very first step of training to use that magical skill.
For some reason, when you were just mentioning that, I thought of William Blake's great quotes about the imagination and how the imagination is a doorway. Can you just share with the listeners out there, Josephine, because people might be wondering, okay, what does Josephine mean about imagination? Can you just kind of delineate that?
Yeah, and this is not a new thing. I've seen some stuff out on the net where it's like, oh, this right, Josephine McCarthy. She talks about doing magic in your imagination. That's fucked up, dude. That's a thing to say. It's like, oh, good Lord, count to 10. It's a very ancient method. If you know your history, your classical history, your philosophy and your classical texts, this shit is talked about for 3,000 years. Your imagination is a major tool. What do I mean by that? In today's world, your imagination is something where you conjure something up in your head. So you daydream or you imagine something. Now, when the human consciousness uses its imagination, it starts to form things. It starts to form patterns. When you're just using it within your own imagination, that's all it does, is it forms patterns. If you are a natural magician, a natural psychic, it can start to turn some lights on, and that beings and other things become aware of you. Now, besides that, the inner worlds, the worlds that we talk about in magic, the vocabulary magic is so fucked up at the moment. The sort of astral realm and this realm and that realm. You have a physical world, and then you have all the other worlds. You have an underworld. You have everything, and there's no nice list. I used to have nice lists, and now as I'm knocking near 60, it's like, I have no fucking idea at all. There's just loads of them. They are not physical. They are energetic, if you want to use that word. I call them they're pattern, because it's patterns. It's all patterns that don't physically manifest. You can engage, you are within that all of the time, you're just not aware of it. You can engage and become aware of it and become a part of it by using the imagination. That is a tool. You use the imagination as a tool, as a doorway, and then it opens out and it's no longer imagination. You're actually into a conversation with something, or you're actually in your mind is in one place and your body is in another. But we think in terms of geographical location. Well, like, how can the mind leave the body? It's not. It's all in together. So do you see how difficult this can get? Using the imagination, if you want to, for instance, work in vision, and, remote viewing is a word that people know, which is where you cast the mind geographically to a place, to a physical place. You can cast the mind to an inner place, which has no geography because it has no physical. It's just there, but you can access it. You can access time forwards and backwards. You can access the underworld, the death. You can access the stars. Your mind can go anywhere. At first, it is just your imagination because your mind doesn't know how to work. Through practicing and working with the imagination in a particular way, you start to loosen the boundaries between the physical and the non-physical. That boundary crossover is different for every person. Again, it's individual. Sometimes it can take a long time. Sometimes you've always had it. You know when you've crossed that boundary. When you start seeing things that are not in your imagination, they're not in your subconscious vocabulary, you have no idea what it is you're looking at. You don't understand it at all. But you pay attention because that's what magicians do, and you take note of it. And then 2 years later, for instance, there's a major archaeological discovery where this really weird thing is depicted and nobody knows what it is, but you saw it 2 years before. What was happening there? Were you time jumping and looking? Or were you actually seeing the thing that was dug up and that your awareness has brought it back into the collective awareness? That you can get yourself tied in knots in that sort of philosophy for generations. But as a magician, you take it right back down to the practical and the pragmatic. When you've crossed from the imagination into the other realms, you will know by direct experience, and it won't be a one that you can necessarily explain to anyone else. And it's not one where you might be fooling yourself. It is so obvious. And then you start to learn that interactions with that affects the physical body and the physical environment around you, and can do that quite strongly. And this is when you then start to understand that you're not going away somewhere. You're accessing different layers of the environment that you live in. There it is all around you and all within you. God, it's getting very deep, this, isn't it?
No, this is great, because I love your use of the term, Josephine, about influencing patterns. And I know when Frater Ashen Chassan was on the podcast talking about, it's like if you're in the ocean, right, and trying to isolate one drop of water, saying, I want this. It's like you're not looking at everything else,
Yeah, you can't. It's a very good analogy. Once you've made that crossover and you've started to experience, and it won't happen every time, and then you'll try to second guess yourself, which shuts it down. You have to be as a child with the child's imagination. Just let it do its thing. The only adult magical thing you're putting onto it is a definition of where it's going and what it's talking to. And you will make a lot of mistakes. You'll have where you think it's real and it isn't. It's just your imagination and you can't discern which one it is. You'll have some where, you think it's your imagination and it's actually real and it's coming at you and you can't discern where it is. The discernment can only come from doing it and doing it and doing it and learning. Just as moving to a new city and finding out where the safe spots are and where the safe spots are not, where the shops are, where, this is pre-Google era. Before you could Google everything, pre-internet, you would have to go out and discover for yourself from direct experience. As a child growing up and as a young adult, you learn to read people, who are the good people, who are the bad people, who are potentially dodgy. As a woman walking alone, you learn to read body language so that you're constantly on guard and watching and paying attention to the body language of men around you to know if you're under threat or not. Which in itself is a damning thing to have to say in a modern world, is that women still have to do that. Thank God I'm old and ugly now, so I don't have to worry about that. But, in my 20s and 30s, I was constantly, if I was alone in a city that I didn't know, I had to be constantly on guard, watching all the time. Like every woman out there, or most women out there, I've been attacked multiple times. You learn by direct experience and from bad experience to pay the fuck attention and watch everything around you. It's the same when doing visionary work, which works through the imagination. Some schools don't use it at all. Some schools use it in a psychological model, which is 10% of it. The rest is crap. Some schools use vision work and ritual. Some very sort of tribal types of magic just use vision and not any ritual. At Quarrier, everything's in there. So the visionary stuff you're trained right from day one, and the training is done if you follow it in sequence. It's all dovetailed in so that you're learning different sets of skills that all tie in together, so that as you then start working more and more in vision, you've already without realizing, had a safety mechanism constructed around you to protect you while you work. So it's like having, I don't know if they have them anymore, or whether health and safety's gotten rid of them. When my kids were babies, we had these little things we could sit them in that were like little alien ships on wheels with a little seat, and you'd sit the kid in and you have a tray in front, and you could put toys on the tray, and the baby, the toddler, could sort of push themselves round.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's training. That's magical training. That's what magical training does. It gets your legs strong, but keeps you safe at the same time, while giving you some little bricks on your tray to play with and giving you the freedom of the house. That's how magical training should be. It's not about learning recipes and names and passing exams and getting badges. It's about learning skills while in a safe environment, but with enough, not too much health and safety, so that you can have some safe, bad experiences that will teach you a lot.
I think it's so important for, I know myself, and I really hope the listeners to really understand that, because it is such an important point in terms of getting in there and doing something. Someone just said to me that if something's worth doing, it's worth doing. And I said, oh, it's worth doing well. And they said, no, it's worth doing poorly, because you need to do something. If you can only just do this specific thing and you're starting from zero, quote unquote, just do that. Do something, as opposed to just armchairing something to death.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, get rid of the books, or just put them away. You leave them. Books are for reference. Books are for getting inspirations and ideas and, a basic ABC. And most of the books in my house are not magical books. They're archaeology, Egyptology, history, philosophy, religions. They're there for you to reference and to learn from. But in terms of magic, you start with something, as you say, and do it and learn from your mistakes. But don't go in with the mentality of, oh, it's great to learn from mistakes, so I'm just going to ignore everything that everyone has said to me, and I'm going to do what the fuck I like, and I'm going to raise this demon, and I'm going to do that, and blah, 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 blah. And then what happens is 2 years later, they're emailing me going, oh, I'm really depressed, and like, I've got this voice in my head telling me to do this, and I think it's a demon. It's like, no, it's a parasite. You're filthy. You're absolutely parasite to the eyeballs because you're a moron. You need to do this, this, this. Well, that doesn't sound very flashy. It's just like, what, get a ritual buff? Well, what's that? I mean, I need that really hard-hitting ritual that you've got hidden away. It's like, what? You fucking deserve your parasites now. Fuck off.
Oh, my goodness.
Climb out of it. Oh, they won't. And if they climb out of it, they've learned some really good lessons that they will never, ever forget.
I don't even know what even an appropriate analogy would be, but it's like if someone, wants to really appreciate a great work of literature, if you're reading Jane Austen or Virginia Woolf or, Milton or something, you can just want to, well, I'm going to just dive right in. But if you don't know, basic syntax and grammar and how it works, you'll never get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing with exorcism. Everyone wants to be an occult exorcist because it's really glamorous, and it's like, is it really? No, the idea is really glamorous, and that idea has basically come from Supernatural on TV. And it's nothing even remotely like that. But people get dragged into this glamour. And also the savior mentality comes out. They want to save the world. And they want to be the savior, and they want to be the goody and casting out the bad and all of this. And they're just an idiot, basically, without realizing it. Many of them, hopefully, at some point, get a very red face, realize, and learn from that, and mature a little bit. And that then has been a very good training for them. But the ones who don't, who just carry on being morons, it's like, well, bye. A huge amount of people that, and it's not a huge amount in terms of the population of the planet, but, you know, the people who get in touch with the cult exorcists, 90% of the time are just mentally ill or completely paranoid, or have been told because they've gone for a reading somewhere. This is a really common one. They go for a reading and they pay $100 for this reading, and the reader says, oh my God, you know, you've got this demon in you, or you've got this spirit, or there's this, or a curse on you, because they want to make money out of you by selling you product and having you come back and come back and come back and come back. And some people get trapped in that. Other people will then contact me and go, oh, I've been magically attacked. It told me that, you know, someone told me in a tarot reading. It's like, well, do you know any magicians? Well, no. Okay. Have you pissed anyone off lately? No. So why do you think you've been magically attacked? What's your life doing? Well, my life's fine. But this person in a reading told me that I've been magically attacked and that I needed help. It's like, if you're fine, you're fine. Fuck off. You know?
There's so many people who would get really deflated if, instead of being told you're infested by a demon, it's like, you know, you should really go talk to your mother about some childhood issues that you have.
Yeah. Or, you know, the other thing, again, that's where the psychology comes in. And that's valid. That is very valid. The other way to put that round, if it is something coming from childhood, is to say, well, sit down, think very carefully over the next few weeks, put yourself in your mum's position of what really put yourself in your mum's position of what she was going through at that time when she did this, that and the other that hurt you very badly. And that hurt will stay with you. It will heal in some way, but it will leave a scar, and that's good. That's okay. You are going to be scarred. Live with it. We are beings covered in scars. We are not going to go back to factory settings. That's the first thing Americans need to get over. There is no factory settings. When you're told that by someone who wants to sell that to you, who wants to make a lot of money out of giving you therapy for 20 odd years. There is no factory settings. You have a bad experience. It can be a terrible experience. You will be scarred. It will affect how you think, how you act for a long time. As a magician, what you do is you sit down and you say, yeah, that fucking hurt me. Yeah, it's changed how I look at people and how I react to this. And looking back on my life, I can see how I reacted in this, that and the other because of that pain from childhood. And then you think, right, why did that happen? Not happen to you. Why did that situation happen? Put yourself in your mum's head. Your mum was a person who was just trying to get through life in the way that they could. That might have meant being an alcoholic, running away, beating you, all of these, abandoning you, all of these things, which to you as the child is a terrible thing because, you know, a mum is supposed to protect the child and raise them. But that mum is also a human being. And you don't know what that human being went through. You never know everything about everyone, no matter how close they are to you. You don't know what hell that poor woman went through at some point that made her who she was and made her do what she did. And that's when you get to the point of realizing that we're all pretty much fucked up and we're all just trying to get through life in the best way we can. And so what you do as a magician then is you say, okay, that was a bad situation. That came out of probably something that happened before even then. I have these scars. I recognize those scars and I recognize where they come from. That's all I need to know, is that I don't pass that forward into the next generation. Straight away, you've done a magical act in that you've taken control of how you are going to act in the future. And when you fall off the wagon, you recognize it straight away and go, oh, fuck, I'm just being just like my fucking mother. And you apologize and you say, I'm sorry, I was just like my fucking mother then. I see it, I'm really sorry. But I'm really angry, but not at you. I just want to be really fucking angry. It's about maturity, it's about growing up. And that sort of stuff doesn't tend to come up too much with exorcism stuff. What you tend to get is people who are psychotic, who have lost, who don't, you know, their reality is all over the place. Their imagination is basically taking control of the mind and it's running rampant. And, a lot of that is chemical. There is nothing magically you can do about that. They need to be seen by a doctor, by a psychiatrist. They need help. And it's not your job to help them. You need to know your own limits in exorcism for a start off. There's other times where, people will come and they're mentally ill and they're heavily parasited. If that person is someone who is within your circle, like your family, your friends, you can ritually clean them up, but it's going to go right back to parasited within a month because the psychosis is driving the behavior that's attracting the parasites. So there's nothing you can do about it. Some people come to you and they're very heavily parasited and they think it's a demonic possession, but it's not. It's so fucking rare to get. Actually, the idea demonic that's in people's consciousness now doesn't actually exist in that way. It's something completely different. But the parasites are the ones that get in your head and make you behave in a certain way. In the behavior that put it there in the first place, often you can clean a person up and take everything out, but they will not change their behavior. They might for a week or 2 weeks, but that behavior is going to come back because they're not about to change their life in a way that's uncomfortable for them. So, you then have to make these choices of, am I going to burn myself out? Because this is not easy work. You can't just wave a wand and do a ritual and all is well. You are energetically connected to everyone that you've worked on. A lot of exorcists don't understand that until it's too late. And you can say it, people don't agree with it, and then 20 years later they're back in touch with you going, oh my God, I'm connected to so much, I'm carrying all of these burdens because of the work that they did. And there is no way of helping that person without going through that connection. So you learn to be very, very, very careful about who you choose to work on and why you choose to work on them. You can clean a person up, they go away, they're dirty again. You've achieved nothing other than setting up a connection that's very difficult to get rid of. They haven't learned anything. Leave them with the parasites. They come to you and they say blah, blah, blah. You just tell them, this is what's happening to you and this is why it's happening. This is how they got in. This is what they're feeding off of. You go away and change this. You get rid of them for yourself in your own time. They then have a choice, clean their own shit up or live in it. That is the best way for 99.9% of that sort of thing, is that you give people the tools to do it for themselves. And, the ones that are just looking for drama, that you're not feeding that. The ones that are mentally ill, because you say to a mentally ill who's seriously psychotic, go see a doctor. They're not going to, because to them they're perfectly normal. So there is nothing you can do. Do you know what I mean? And what you end up doing then is dealing with the things that are really important that cannot be done by the person or place. And it really isn't glamorous and it isn't pleasant work. If you're not willing to clean toilets in places where people have constant diarrhea on the floor and everywhere, if you can't physically clean that up, don't go do exorcism, because it's the energetic version of doing that. It has that element to it of cleaning up shit. Do remember, if you're taking things out of people, there is going to be a connection set up there.
Historically, can you just set the record straight that exorcism has a much older use in terms of, taking something from one place and putting it into another place? It's not like forcing out a demon. Can you mention that?
No, the whole forcing thing goes back to this dualism again, which was the first few centuries in Christianity. And some really weird shit came out of that time, of this good versus evil, heaven and hell and all of that sort of thing. It is all, in terms of human civilization, a pretty modern construct. And it's a very good control mechanism as well. I'm not saying that the world is all love and light. It's not. What you have is creation, destruction, and balance in between. And the creation and destruction is all part of the good. It's the chaos that's the bad. In terms of the idea today, that's from movies. Those movies in turn come from stories that date back to the medieval period where, the people were illiterate and, like today, You have a lot of drama queens. You have a lot of people manipulating for money and power. And there's a lot of fantasy and bad pseudo history around a lot of this stuff. But basically think of it like this is if you go pre-Christian and also beyond when you're looking at other, if you're looking at more tribal religions and stuff, is that everything that is created both physically and non-physically has a function within the patterns. And when you get a being with one function crossing a being, maybe a human, with another function in a way that's jarring, then you're going to have a problem. And that's where you step in, and you would have people working in villages and tribes and families and magicians and temples and temple culture and stuff like that. Is you separate the two, basically. If a dog wanders into your garden and starts pissing up your roses, you don't do a massive ritual to send it down into the depths and start spewing green vomit everywhere and wafting fucking crucifixes everywhere. No, you just get hold of the fucking dog and yank it out and close the gate. It's that simple.
To that point, Josephine, one of the books that you wrote, of course, is The Exorcist Handbook, but can you just share about how instead of being a general book, that's a very specific book for people entering a very specific area of work?
Yeah, when I wrote that, I'd just come back to Britain. I didn't expect that book to sell more than maybe 100 copies. I wrote it for people working in magic, people working in esoteric Christianity, occultists, people who basically knew the layout of the land, who worked vision, who worked ritual, who, worked in the underworld, who know what these places are and what they do, and did it with a sense of humour as well, because, it's such a heavy subject. It was a toss-up because it was going to a publisher where it would be put out on Amazon, therefore to the general public. I just assumed it would just hide in a corner and most people would never see it. I had to leave a lot of stuff out and just sort of hint at certain things or just put something there but not quite how to get there or how to do it, because I would expect the people who needed that book would know what I was talking about, and it would give them the bits of information that they had lacking. That they were going from being, they were going into a period of service as being an occultist for 5 years, whatever, and that this would give them ideas as I was coming out the other end and stopping doing that work. So I didn't expect it to go out. And for some people, some poor people, oh my God, it's the first magical book they've ever read. And I'm thinking, oh, you poor fucking child. Oh my God, what have I done to you? And I get so many emails every week from people who've just read that book and nothing else. And I just look at the emails going, what do you say? What the fuck do you say? Like, oh, Lordy.
That's when you send them the link to the Quaria course and have them start there.
It's just, yeah, I don't even know what to say with that. That was not the intention when the book went out, was that it would be the first book that anyone would pick up to do with magic. If it is the first book you've read to do with magic, put the fucker down. Find something else. Put it on a shelf or read it for entertainment and then go back to it in a few years. And then it may or may not be of use to you. Sadly, the timing of it when it came out was maybe a year or two before Supernatural then sort of hit Britain. And then it all sort of exploded because people had Supernatural and of course because society is getting in such a mess. And everything is a demon these days. Everything is a demon. Everything is possessed. So The Exorcist, and that's the first book that comes up. So I apologize. I seriously apologize to the world. That was not meant to go out in that way, but now it's out there, it is. So it's there.
And I think this is a good opportunity to talk about listener questions, because there are things that, as you mentioned, and we were talking before the podcast, that you have in the book that are obviously, it's very, very specific, but can also be extrapolated to a larger kind of broader application. And this question here, Josephine, is from Anthony, who says, In the Exorcist Handbook, you provide a ritual called the Vision of Judgment. It is a renunciation of all earthly ties and an offering of those things unto the care of God. This is a serious commitment and critical to the path of the exorcist, not to be undertaken lightly. If a person has not yet undertaken the Vision of Judgment ritual or is unwilling to undergo the ritual, what do you recommend to that person when energies or entities that must be exorcised continue to crop up in their path? My engagement decisions have depended on the weight and the severity of the negative entity, and also have been dependent on occasionally helping others when a negative entity is clearly messing with them. So do you recommend still engaging with the entities in the situation where the ritual was not undertaken, or do you recommend retreating?
It's a very good question. And the Vision of Judgment this is not like the universal, the only thing that you must do before you do that. Again, remember when I was writing the book, it was written for a specific stream of people. Every culture has its version of this sort of a process. It's a process. It's not something that you do, switches a lightning and you're good to go. It starts a process that can unfold over years, but as it's unfolding, it's also working with you. You have to make your own decisions. I can't make recommendations for something like that because it has to be an individual decision. What you do is you look at the process of what the Vision of Judgment ritual is about. What is it doing? It's not absolving yourself of your past, which a lot of people seem to think it is. It isn't. What you're doing is saying, right, up till now, I've lived this life, I've done good and bad, I have kids, I have this, that, and the other. I've got to a point where I'm choosing to walk a particular path intensively in service. And this is non-religious, but it's about divinity. There's a difference between divinity and religion. You have to work with that whole universal structure when you're doing very powerful work. When you're doing very powerful work as an exorcist, if you get beyond the silly stuff, the gentle stuff, the parasites, this, that, and the other, you can occasionally come up against something that is very, very dangerous. If it's very dangerous, it's dangerous for you. If you have children, it's very dangerous for your children. Your children are energetically linked to you. Get over this idea that people are not interlinked. They are. And those links can get stronger or weaker. The Vision of Judgment is it's the same process idea as the death in life, which was done in MaGicK for quite a long period of time. It's an alchemical process. It's not a psychological process. It is an actual magical chemical process. It's also the same as the judgment of the scales done in life that you see in the Egyptian funerary texts. Again, it's an ancient thing that just pops up in different ways, different formats on the surface, but underneath the actual structure is the same. You cannot just sort of plop into the idea of, right, I want to be an exorcist, I've done a bit of MaGicK, I've done a bit of drumming, I've done a bit of this, I'm going to do the Vision of Judgment, and then I'm going to go be an exorcist. You will do yourself and other people harm if you do that. If you say, well, I've done a bit of drumming, I've done a bit of MaGicK, and I want to be of service, and I want to be an exorcist and take things out of people, then go do it. But as you go do it, and you make your own decisions, be aware that your children, your lover, maybe your brothers and sisters are to some extent connected to you energetically. And if you should, God forbid, come up against something that's big and intelligent and powerful, it will see those things because they're connected to you. And it knows that you, like with your children, you would give your life to protect your children. So if that being needs to manipulate you, just like somebody with a gun will point a gun at your child and say, give me all your money, I'm going to blow your kid's head off. It's exactly the same thing. Again, MaGicK, the inner worlds, the inner beings, it's exactly the same as the physical world and the physical people. There's very little difference. You learn the same skills, you use the same common sense, you use the same maturity. What you've learned in life serves you in MaGicK every single time. And what the vision of judgment does, what the scales do, what the alchemical death does, is it cuts those connections. It doesn't mean you will never see your family again. What it does is it speeds up a fate process and puts you into death. So it looks like you've died, basically. And then you come out the other side. And if you then reconnect with your kids and they're grown up, it shows there's a different connection. But you can make a point as a magician of holding those connections either hidden and you should have the skills to do that. If you don't have the skills to do that, then don't do the whole thing. This is like, don't do heart surgery if you're not a fucking heart surgeon. Don't just get a book and buy the tools. The other thing is that you, in the vision of judgment, what it's doing is putting you in that judgment after death while in life. So everything that you've done that caused an imbalance, it's not about good and bad. That's cultural programming. It's about imbalance. What's imbalanced, what's balanced. Imbalance can be good or bad. What imbalances have caused suffering? What imbalances have caused destruction that shouldn't have been destroyed? All this sort of thing is all weighed. It's all looked at, not therapeutically, or it's all there, bang, suddenly in one instant. And what you're asking for is rebalancing so that all of that is cleared so that you've got a clear path ahead. That means that all the rebalancing that needs to happen from all of those things that you haven't rebalanced will now come 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bang, 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 straight after the other. And when you do that, it speeds your fate up. If you were going to learn about the viciousness of humanity by being in a very bad marriage and having the shit beaten out of you and being abused and gaslighted and stuff like that, and you were going to have to learn that over 30 years, but you do this, you will learn it in a week. You will get the whole fucking lot in a week, in 2 weeks. You will get it in the next year, in a week, in a very condensed form. So it isn't something to be undertaken lightly. So the guy is, Anthony is very wise to step back and say, hang on a minute, is this what I want to do? What you can do for a situation like with Anthony where he's saying, what if you're not willing to do that? That's fine, because don't forget, this was written basically for esoteric Catholic priests and for occultists who follow a priesthood path in service. So that process is already working, it's already doing. For someone who comes along who's a magician, who's wanting to do that, is just be aware of your weaknesses. Be really aware of your weak points. Be aware of your fears and face your fears. Be aware of truth and face your truth and face truth around you and speak truth and own up. Be aware of who is dependent on you, who can be used to blackmail you. What is it that you cling to? Do you cling to your job, your money, your house? This can all be taken away from you. If you cling, a powerful consciousness can see that as your weakness and just decimate you. Really know what the fuck it is you're up against and know where your weaknesses lie, where your weak spots are, what can be used. And half the problem now, because of programs like Supernatural and other programs like that, is you get people in their 20s and 30s and they've seen it and they're all pumped up and they're full of testosterone and that's me and I'm going to go slay me some demons and I'm going to go do some magic and I've got my Wellington boots with sigils on it and I've got this, that and the other, and it's like, dude, you're such an idiot. And they'll either get killed, nothing will happen to them, or they'll spend the next 30 years unraveling it all. It is what it is. Human nature is just all, endlessly fascinating when you watch. And again, the same rules apply in exorcism as magic. It's not about the outfits, it's not about the tools, it's not about the scripts, it's not about any of that. It's about you, your focus, your intent, your balance. Have you got your shit together? Can you be silent and still? And again with exorcism, if you don't know what you're doing in magic, don't do exorcism. Unless you're really dabbling just on the periphery. That's fine. You'll learn a lot. You'll get a few bruises. You might get infested yourself. You'll learn. But in anything serious, it's like Seriously, if you cannot be silent and still, if you don't know how to vanish, which the meditations for 3, 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, monkey mind, learning all of that, eventually becomes a skill as an adept where you can just temporarily vanish from an inner point of view, go into the stillness and just disappear. So it can't see you. And that's what saves your life when there is something really destructive coming at you, is no fear, no reaction, complete and utter stillness and dispersal so that you're no longer there. There's nothing for it to get hold of. That saved my life more than anything. It's not about waving wands and sprinkling, this smell and that utterance and things like that. At the end of the day, it's all about you and how you operate as a magician with no tools, with no dressing, with nothing. You are the magic. You could become magic. You don't eventually be a magician. You become magic.
Such great wisdom. And to your point, Josephine, a couple moments ago, when you mentioned about the delineation between the divinity and the religion, this question comes from Annalise Antoinette, who's asking to that point. In your introduction of the Exorcist Handbook, you write, quote, "The most effective types of exorcists are the ones that are either able to pass equally and freely between all faiths and none, and to work without dogma. The other extreme is an exorcist," you write, "who is fully and deeply immersed in one specific religious faith." And Annalise is asking, saying, and you go on to explain that the ceremony of a strict religious exorcist only works if the host and the possessor are of the same religious stream. So her question is, do you, Josephine, find that is also true of cursing, of unbinding angels, of magical attacks, or does that stipulation only apply to exorcism?
Well, firstly, you have to understand why that works. I'm from the camp where you pass equally and freely between all faiths and none, and you work without dogma. In America, you're not exposed to that much really in terms of foreign culture, and there's a lot of hostility, particularly against certain religions and cultures, which is, as a magician, you just cannot afford to do because that's just silly. You have the host and possessor being from the same religious stream. What that's talking about there is the egregore of the religion becoming very badly parasited. And so it only works within that religion because it's basically the religion eating its people. The exorcist working within that religion when he does his ritual, which, it's like in the Catholic Church, the Catholic exorcists. I have so many dints in my head from listening to those guys. Seriously, it's like, oh God, they're unstable drama queens to the absolute fucking extreme. Not understand, because the dogma is so deeply embedded that they're not understanding what it is they're actually looking at, which would make life so much fucking easier if they would. The Catholic Church, for example, as an organisation, is extremely parasited and has been for a long time. Most dogmatic religions are. Most dogmatic magical organisations are. Because that's what happens. It becomes infected eventually. So very, very parasited. So you have a Catholic who thinks they've been possessed by the devil. They're screaming and they're uttering and all of this sort of thing. And they call the priest. And the priest comes along and this woman starts uttering in Aramaic and Latin and whatever. And, sometimes it's just coming out their subconscious because they read it in school, and other times, very rare, again, it's pretty rare, it is a being that's uttering true. It's the parasited, infected egregore. It's the energetic collective consciousness of the religion that's coming through a fractured person. And the fractured person who's mentally ill at the same time and also a drama queen at the same time makes for this very unhealthy soup. So the priest does the ritual Romane, does the exorcism. Of course, most of the time it doesn't work. Sometimes everything will settle down. When it settles down, it's not because there's been a demon in there. The demon's gone, oh, okay, you told me to go away, so I'll go now. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that the Latin recitation is tuning the gates in the egregore and just tuning it a little bit so it backs off. most of the time when you're looking at Catholic exorcisms, you're looking at mental illness. Sometimes you're looking at intelligent parasitical beings, which is what the Catholic Church would call demons. This is why it ends up being such a problem with language as well, is because in the consciousness, in this dualistic consciousness, demon is something that's really evil and lives in the fire of hell, and it has all these boils all over it, and it makes people do really bad things, and it's going to take over the world and blah, 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 blah. Actually, what you've got is an intelligent parasite who's feeding off of a certain type of behavior. And when you figure that out and you realize that, it doesn't matter what religion you're coming from, basically you just get rid of it. There are methods to take it out, seal the person up, put the parasite back where it needs to be, and then get on with what you're doing. The whole where it's the strict religious thing is where it's all in one egregore. It's all working within it. That's why, a Catholic exorcist, if you take them to the other side of the world and somebody's heavily infected with the parasite and they're, pagan or whatever and blah, it's like, the priest will do his stuff and nothing happens because, it's nothing to do with the Catholic egregore. I've had that so many times actually, and I've been called to houses where, there has been a haunting and there has been problems, and they've called the Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest has done a cleansing and a blessing, and it's gone very quiet for 3-4 days, and then it's come back. Straight away, that tells me, yes, there is something going on there. The blessing will only flatten it very slightly for a little bit, and then it all comes back in again. It's like if you walk on a pathway and there's a lot of ticks, and you get a brush and you brush them back. Half an hour later, they're all back on again. That's all it does. You have to find out, why is it there? How did it get there? What is feeding it? Why isn't it hungry? What its energetic connection is to that place. Where do you think you could put it where it won't do any more harm? It's not about punishment, because it's just, everything has a purpose. Sometimes you do need to lock something up and throw the key away. Yes, that is true. But 90% of the time, you can usually find somewhere to stick them or keep them busy. The other thing is that fairy beings can cause all sorts of fucking trouble. And, it's just a different clash of consciousness and culture. And that's where what people call demon traps come in, which is basically fairy is a land being trap. It's something that's knotted or sparkly and has lots of patterns, and a lot of beings will come in and they see the pattern, because we are patterns. We live in patterns. You externalize a pattern. It absolutely fascinates them. So you can have them busy in the corner. If you can't get rid of something, you work with one of these things. You can stick it up in the corner, and it'll keep the fucker busy until you can figure out what to do next with it.
That leads into the next question, because you've mentioned how important it is to delineate between various types of these patterns. You've mentioned there's very, very rare, but there could be an actual malevolent being, but there's parasites, there's ghosts, there's fairy beings, and to that point, Annalise is also asking, you mentioned that if you can't figure out what an entity is and where it's come from, you can always ask it, and that you have done that a few times and you've gotten straight, useful answers. But she's asking, does this mean that you're usually often easily figure out where a being is and its nature without asking? And is that because of certain characteristics, that you recognize? Or is it dependent on your intuition as well as guidance from other spiritual assistants?
It is, basically years of experience. Perception, again, is back to pay attention. It's so difficult to get this through to people because education, the way that education systems work now, basically shut this down, but you pay attention to everything because you're learning to wire your brain in a particular way. By doing that, by the time you get to this sort of work, your brain is wired to recognize certain very tiny behaviors and patterns. And the more you work with beings, the more you start to, it's like people, again, walking down a street. If I sort of whip you now and dump you right in the middle of Iraq, if you've never been to Iraq, you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, you don't know anything, and you know that it's dangerous in a lot of the different places, how do you know friend or foe? You have to fall back on the skills that that you've grown up with. You've learned to watch body language, facial expression, what people wear, how they smell, what they say. You know, some people, when you ask them their name, they'll tell you who they are. They'll tell you where they're from. Some people won't, or they'll tell you lies. So again, discernment. When you're dealing with a being, when you go into a situation, the first thing that you're paying attention, say if it's a building, you're paying attention to, you know, the energetic feel of the place for a start off the minute you walk in. This is why you learn to be still and to meditate and shut up, so that you can become very sensitive to very subtle shifts. What does it look like? What does it smell like? And I'm not talking about, oh, the sulphurous smells coming out of a dark corner and there are great flames licking up the sky astral. You know, it's like, it's not quite as subtle as that, you know. You walk in, sometimes there's an odd smell. We get this in the house, you know, I know dead person smell, which often sort of tells me the type of dead person as well. You know, it's that armpit smell, lived out in the woods smell, that sort of thing. A very pheromone smell is often fairy beings coming with that sort of smell. You learn to distinguish these different smells. Dog shit smells. I mean, it's also individual to you. Your own brain will wire itself. By paying attention, your brain will wire itself to start to recognize certain things. So for me, when there's something seriously bad there, it's not sulphurous smell, it's dog shit smell. And that's individual to me. I get the dog shit smell straight away. It's either, right, a dog is shit in this building, or there's something here that's not good. So the first job is you look for the dog shit and find out if there's a dog in the, if there's no dog in the building and it has never had a dog in it and there is no dog shit anywhere, okay, right, we might have a bit of a problem. What does the being do that has caused the people to get in contact with you? What is the behavior? The behavior tells a lot. Just as behavior of different human beings tells you a lot about what a type of entity is. What is it doing? Is it, by its behavior, looking for food? Is it looking for attention? Is it trapped trying to get out? Is it trying to ride someone like a car? Don't forget, our bodies are not us. Our bodies are our cars, our vehicles. Yes, our soul is embedded within every cell of our body, but our soul and our body and our consciousness are all different layers. And the body is a nice vehicle for beings that don't have a body. So that can become an issue sometimes. Hence you get beings trying to move into other people. Is it looking for a home? Is it looking for a vessel? Is it looking for a home in the building? Why is it looking for a home? Has its home been damaged? Has there been something going on outside? Like, has a new road been put in that's diverted a spring that's brought the water up underneath the house, and the beings that live in that spring don't know where the fuck they are? See how simple it can get? And so the type of being is the type of behavior, the type of smells, the type, what is it doing? And if anyone comes to you and says, oh, well, you know, I think our house is haunted because, like, the chairs keep flying against the wall and there's this sulphurous poofing that keeps happening, and, like, there's this green stuff keeps running down the wall, and then my daughter, she was up on the ceiling, and it's like, I'm sorry, I'm busy that week. Not for you. You know, there's someone who's either nuts, wanting attention, is a drama queen, or all three. When someone comes to you and says, I've just moved into this house, my kids are having nightmares every night, everyone is deeply uncomfortable all the time, we can't sleep properly. My son has started to behave in a really weird way that is so not like him. And it's not just teenage stuff, it's like really weird behaviour. And, you know, the animals won't come in the house and stuff. You've got a real serious problem going on there. From that behaviour, you know, that's, to me, would sound straight away like there's something that's underneath the house. There's a burial, or it's a being's territory that the house has been dumped on, and this being is fighting for its territory. Again, its characteristics. And you can ask, you know, it's like the amount of times, you know, especially when I was young, when I was doing vision stuff, and, you know, you'd get this being of shining light and wings, and that'd come walking up towards me and go, oh, hail, and it's like, oh, is that an angel? And I'd say, are you an angel? He'd go, well, do you want me to be?
Oh, boy.
So it's like, What are you? Well, I could be anything you want me to be, actually. It's a parasite looking to, and being very polite, trying to, because, we all think about energetic parasites as being bad. They're not. It's just they're looking for food like everybody else does. It's just that they need to go from host to host. And some of them are quite funny, actually. It's like with the human body, you're full of bacteria, fungus, of viruses, of all sorts of shit. It's all part of life. It's when it gets out of balance or it's too big, it's a problem. But yeah, what this being was trying to do was get into an engagement with me whereby it would present as I wanted it to and help me with stuff in return for food. It wanted my energy. It wanted a particular type of my energy. Your emotions are your energy. Your emotions are food. And so it wanted me to feel all spiritual and overawed and connected with angelic and God, so it could feed off that, because all of that is emotion, which is chemical, which is food. And I was like, well, that's very kind of you, but no thanks. Like, oh, okay. And then goes off to the next person. And when you go to these new age centers for, healing and meditation, or ascended masters or light workers, and I'm sorry, I'm not putting you guys down, because I know that lot with the strongest of intent really are, but they're absolute fucking dinner for a lot of these beings, because that sense of light, anything that hits you emotionally, whether it's good emotion, bad emotion, fear, terror, spiritual overawe, all of that sort of thing is all energy that will feed something if it can get dinner. And it will trigger it in you to give you that experience in order for it to get dinner, so that you both get something. Now, if you're fine with that, that's fine. Just know what it is that's happening is that your experience is not necessarily a true one. It's one generated to give you an experience to open you up energetically so it can have dinner, which is why emotions are very, very important in magic, and that you know exactly what your emotions are, what generates them, where they come from, why they are, and when to drop them and not have them when you're working with power and magic. For an exorcist with emotion is death. You really are, or insanity. If you're an emotional person and you want to be an exorcist, you're basically fucked. Don't do it, because you will become a mess. Usually with women, it tends to hit through the body more than the mind. It can hit the woman's mind, but it tends to hit the body first. It's just how power's processed. With a man, 90% of the time it hits the mind and sometimes the body, without fail. And you see it over and over and over and over again. You have these leaders or these teachers or these whatevers, and they come out with all this wonderful stuff, and they can trigger wonderful experiences in people, and they're having wonderful experiences, and it's basically a feeding station. And then suddenly the next thing you hear is that their house is blown up, or they've committed suicide, or they've, run off to Peru and are snorting cocaine while surrounded by 20 prostitutes and stuff like that. Some of that pattern of behaviour is to do with the parasites that are drawn in by that emotional behaviour in the first place.
It sounds like it kind of feeds not only upon itself, but I was thinking to your point about like the Catholic egregore. It's like someone comes in, does a blessing, in a very Catholic, priest-like manner, and that it may go away, but you're just feeding something again. You're just letting it grow.
If it is a Catholic pattern that's there, yes, that's what it will do.
Yeah. Umberto Maggi is asking, I liked your book on exorcism, and he's saying, in the Exorcist Handbook, you mention in Chapter 6 that, quote, our society, as it is, does not have the religious, magical, or spiritual structures to deal with the inner issues that surround death. Instead, society only focuses on the bereaved and their recovery, unquote. And you say that there is a lack of guidance for the dead. So Umberto is asking, could you please, Josephine, talk more about that lack of guidance? Like, what is missing right now?
The lack of guidance for the dead, again, comes from particularly from the Christian religion, Catholic religion, which a fair amount actually of the Christian dogma that was formed, it wasn't a set dogma right from the beginning. It sort of formed over a few hundred years, and then they all made a decision about, how it was going to be. There's a lot of Egyptian stuff in the Christian religion. You see a lot of memes about it, which are all completely wrong anyway, but the whole going into the underworld after death and resurrecting is pure Egyptian. And that's within the Christian faith. And then that turned into, well, Jesus did it, but we're different. We're the stupid people. So we have to wait for final judgment. And so what Christians would do is be buried so that they could rise bodily on Judgment Day. That was the whole belief. And so there is no process for the dead on death. If you think about it, in the Christian structure, there is nothing that talks to you as a structure about what is going to happen to you after you die. Well, you got heaven or you got hell. Oh, well, that's useful. There's no roadmap. There's no interface that the consciousness can use that becomes embedded within the subconscious and then within the spirit of knowing what to do. Because if there's a first interface, there's something that the consciousness can grab onto, and then it starts to work through that. There is a lack of guidance for the dead in modern culture. You think about it, if you go to a funeral, everything is geared towards the people that are alive to make them feel better. Everything is geared towards the grief of the people that are left behind, which is fine, they need that. But also it's like, well, what about the dead person? There is nothing in our modern culture that prepares you in a inner or spiritual or conscious sense. And so people either create different ideas, they're created ideas of their own sort of therapy, so it's not embedded within them. And you actually see that in religion as well, is the amount of times I've talked to Catholic priests, rabbis, you name it, where, they're all deeply spiritual and everything else, and then they're getting close to death. They have cancer or there's something going badly wrong, and they're facing their mortality, and they go into complete and utter fucking meltdown because it wasn't embedded within them. It was a dogma that they believed in, but not really. Do you see what I mean? And that becomes a problem. It's the same problem in MaGicK. When you work magically in any great depth for a while, and you're moving between worlds a lot, and you're bumping into dead, you're bumping into the patterns that the dead pass through, which cultures dress those patterns in different scenarios. And some of the scenarios are very similar and some are quite different. Those are scenarios that are like a vocabulary for the actual pattern. The pattern itself doesn't change, but the scenarios that we play with do. But at least if those scenarios are deeply embedded enough, you recognize that at a deeper level when you then pass into these different patterns, and so you can react with the process. If you're doing a lot of visionary ritual work, eventually you will start flowing back and forth into these places and recognizing, what is survival, what survives, what doesn't survive of you, what's necessary, what isn't necessary. And that changes how you live. How you live defines how you die and how you are as a non-live person. It really is pitiful in the modern world now that there is this really bad lack of guidance. You can't just verbalize it to someone because it becomes a dogma that's easily thrown away. How you live is how you are in death. It's a very difficult one to explain. One of the ways to get around that as a magician, if you're a magical teacher or you had a magical lodge, is to do a lot of work magically in vision and ritual, of working in the underworld, of working in the inner worlds, of bringing the worlds together with your world and understanding that you are in death now. You are walking in death as you are walking in life. It's the same thing. And they're heavily interwoven, and that you come to a point where you learn to separate. And for some people after death, that takes a long time because A, they don't realise they're dead, especially if it's a sudden accident. And that's when you get people turning up in your front row. Or people realise that they've survived death as a consciousness, and they still have the imagery of their life. And so they try and project that to you to say, look, I'm still here. And then eventually they get to a point of understanding that really that part of them no longer exists. It's gone. And so they have to walk away from that, which means walking away from, their relatives, their loved ones, their life, their money, their everything. It just doesn't exist anymore. Some religions and mystical groups have a good understanding of this around the world and work with it. And there's a really nice one that I'll, rather than I'd have to go and get, because I don't know it by memory, I'd have to go get the book out and look through. But there's a in some of the Tibetan funeral texts, and they're all very different. There isn't one Tibetan Book of the Dead. There's a lot of different texts that are all sort of slightly different. But there's one that puts it in a really good summary, and I've dropped it into the course for people to think about, because they work with death in the course and work with the underworld, where the person who is sitting at the side of the body and talking to the dead person, and he's saying, and this is a total Josephine version of the summary. Right, dude, you're an idiot and you're dead. And you're going to have all these things happen to you, but actually they're just ghosts of you that you have to confront and let go of and work your way through if you want to come back into life and sort your shit out a bit more. And then the next line is for someone where they're talking to who's not a complete idiot, of, right, you're the son of an idiot who's not quite of an idiot as your dad was, and you must realise by now that you're dead. And you need to move forward, and you will be confronted by things and understand that they are not you. And when you see this demon and that demon, this is what they're doing, and blah. And then it goes on, and there's another line that the priest can use if he's sat with someone who's working on being a mystic or being a priest or whatever. Okay, noble one, right, you're not as stupid as the idiots and the sons of idiots, and you probably realise that some of these things are parts of you, and it might be a bit of a struggle for you to understand that these demons are not real and are a part of you. And as soon as you recognise that, you'll be able to move through them and choose whether you're going to come back or not, whether you need to, and how to choose the right path. And then it gets to another one of, hail, O great noble one. You know you're dead. You know these things you're confronting are your own constructs. You know that you don't need to come back. So just fucking get on with it. It's great. I mean, it's obviously not in Josephine speak. It's in very religious speak, but that's basically a summary of what they're saying. All of this is all the same. If you look at the Egyptian funeral texts, those were specifically to walk somebody through the death process. This is what you will confront, and these are the things that you will have to deal with. And it's not about what does it look like, is my Auntie Nora there, and blah, de, blah, de, blah. It's not about that. It's about these situations and stages. And what these situations and stages are is your living human life falling off of you in chunks, letting go of things, letting go of the ties, the dogmas, the concepts, the religions, the everything, letting go so that you can move forward and that your soul can make that choice of what it needs to do next. In Egypt, it's fascinating when you study the funeral texts, because there's, 3,000 plus years of them to look at, and you can see how concepts develop, degenerate, collapse, new concepts come up that are more refined versions and go into more depth and then collapse, and other things come up. So they've tried it from many different angles to approach it. And at the peak of them, you realize when you're reading the text, because a lot of, especially Middle Egyptian, which was used from the Middle Kingdom into the New Kingdom for religious texts, is doublespeak. It has layers of meaning. And when you start to read very, very carefully, you start to see that they're talking about the process of the dead and the process of the living, and that the two are intertwined, and that how you walk through life is how you walk through death. And that if you get these skills in life, you're not going to have to confront them in death. So if you seriously want to support people or for yourself, it should always come back to you. Your guidance for death is your life. And I'm not talking about morals and ethics. I'm talking about your own truth, how you view your own truth, your own self, without hiding and fooling yourself, without building all of these structures for yourself to step into that don't really exist. And recognizing that. From a practical point of view, as a magician going to help somebody who has just died, you have all the religious structure or the ceremonial structure for the bereaved. For the actual dead person is very close to the Tibetan idea, is you sit with the body and you talk to them. And you talk to them and you talk to them. And then when it's coming up for the funeral, is opening the gates so that whatever necessary for that person during that process can come through. And it's one of the things that can actually happen. I saw it in a couple of Catholic funerals where it was using the High Latin Mass, and it's like gates open and the person just goes and then the gates close. It's like, whoa, where did they just go? What the fuck? It's an automated process, and it's sort of almost like catapulting them. What happens on the other side of that Catholic gate? I have no idea, because I was just so busy sat there going, whoa, rather than sitting there and going in vision and going through the gate and following them to see what happened. Because it's what it would be is not that something else happens to them that doesn't happen to other dead people. It's what dogmatic structure, what construct are they using that allowed that to happen, and what happens next in that construct? What pattern is it putting them into while they're going through a process? There's a lot of belief, even in religious circles now, that there's nothing after death. And it's like, if that's your consciousness, fine, knock yourself out. Through my years, I've experienced enough directly, and that's objective as well as subjective, to know that there is so much more, and that how we live defines how we then how we go through that process and what comes next. And you do see this in ancient, around the world, actually, in ancient texts. And it's often misunderstood and then rewritten and dogmatized so that it does become an ethical and moral dogma. It's not about that. It's about your balance, your truth, your truthfulness within yourself, and to everything around you defines how you fit in the pattern. And the pattern is there, whether you're alive or dead, and all at the same time. It's all happening at the same time. So you affect your own death and your own post-death by how you are now in your life and what you do. As a magician, I've worked with a lot of people dying and being dead, and there are visionary stuff for the living that you can use to access those patterns. And in Western culture, they come up through the Greek, the Egyptian, the Persian, the Christian. They're all fairly similar, and any of those will connect and work with a pattern. And you take them in and out of vision so they can have that experience. And if you can do it for long enough, so if someone has cancer, it's not known if they're going to make it or not, but they might have a year or two of struggle. They might have a year or two of life, and then we know they're probably going to die, and they want to work on that. Then you would work first in vision, taking them in and out. It's also like stretching them, like chewing gum. It brings the two patterns together within them a lot more. And they find their own way. Once they've worked enough, you get people in that state a couple of times, and then you back off When people don't back off, that's a control issue on behalf of the magician. You have to know when to back and let them get on with it and do it and have their own experiences and morph it in their own way once you've got them going. And if they work with that, they do get to a state where they're quite happy with their own death and they're quite at peace with it and they've learned to let go of things in life. And so they're ready and they've had enough direct experience to know there is something more. So that gets rid of that fear. And they take care of the practicalities of cutting those connections and strings with people and making sure that their dependents are fine and looked after so they don't have to worry about that. That's a good death. That's a very good death. And being able to work with that, with people without emotion. If you bring emotion to the table, you bring parasites to the table, you bring your own bullshit to the table, and it becomes all about you and not about them. So, again, it's back to know yourself.
Does that also extend to people who are needing to let go, but not only do they have personal relationships and family, but they might also have been a central member of a magical lodge? Umberto Maggi is asking in Chapter 6, you mentioned that it's a common problem in esoteric lodges, that when a leader dies, he refuses to let go and continues to try and run the lodge from the inner worlds. Umberto is asking, perhaps Josephine has some personal anecdotes related to this.
It does happen. I've got to be careful in the personal anecdotes, but into, not giving too much detail about other people's magical lodges for a start off. But yeah, I mean, you do get people that refuse to move on. One of the good ways of dealing with that is cremating the body. It's much harder for them to cling on if their body's all burned up, because their body is the pattern that they cling to. And until recently, most people were buried. When a magician dies, if they're still in that control mechanism, if they've run their lodge from a place of total control, which is really not a good place to run it from, or from concern that they don't think it's going to survive and do, again, that's their own shit of, when you're dead, it's gone. You've to let go and let the next generation pick it up, and if they fuck it up, they're going to fuck it up. That's their problem. It's not your problem anymore. And again, that's working it in life. Like with Quarrier, when I die, it's like, it's not my problem anymore. It's somebody else's problem. And if it all breaks up or goes in a completely different direction, that's not my problem. That's for the next generation. You've got to do that in life. But it does become a problem. Matriarchs, patriarchs in families, magical leaders will turn up and not go away. That can be a difficult one, because if they hang around for long enough, they can actually get parasited. If it's really long enough, they become like a hive being where, they're sort of melded with other beings, which is a whole different bag altogether. But yeah, I mean, they had the SIL had that problem with Dion Fortune. And there was actually 2 instances where they had to do a banishment to get rid of her, because she just wouldn't fucking let go. You can understand it from one point of view. If, you've created this baby and you're trying to grow this baby and then you die and, you've left it behind to a group of idiots and you're just like, oh, for fuck's sake, you need to do this, and then, oh, you're taking it in the wrong direction and blah, 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 blah. You can understand why people do that, because it's precious to them. But it's understanding that just because you've survived doesn't mean that you still belong there. You are now in a different pattern. You need to leave. And so, for a while when I first found out about that, I was like, fucking bastards, who the hell do they think they are? And then I sat down and thought about it really carefully over a long period of time, and actually they were right to do it. It's their lodge now. Each generation, it's their lodge. It's not the previous leader's lodge. And if a previous leader is trying to butt in, they do need shutting out. The other one that he's hilarious, who turns up all over the place, is Ernie Butler, who was the original writer with the course that became the SOL, which is different to the SIL. He turns up. Anyone who starts writing a magical course, Ernie turns up. He did it when I started writing Quarrier. Ernie turned up. And it was just like, what the fuck? And at first it was like, okay, because he was trying to give good advice and blah, and it's like, okay, this is good. And then he started trying to over control and interfere, and it's like, no, this is my work, this is not your work. And he was trying to live his work through me, and it's like, no, you're not going to do that. So I had to ask him to leave. I didn't need to banish him. Banishment most of the time is not, you really don't need to do that. You just need to talk with that consciousness. And I just said, look, I am doing this. You need to go off and do what you need to do somewhere else. This is mine. Do not cross my boundary again. And he's like, okay, fine, and backed off. There was no problem. But then, a year later, I had an email from somebody else who was working on something. It was like, Benny Ball has turned up in my living room and I can't get rid of him. And he keeps doing this. He keeps turning up in places because he's working as an inner contact. That's what he thinks he should do. And it's just like, yeah, but not in this way, dude. You need to think about it in a different way. So it does happen, and not, sometimes it's often complicated. It's not straight, oh, these are good or these are bad. It's just complicated. It's like, if you go to college, you go to university, you get your own place, and then your mum starts turning up. You need to do this and you need to do that, and there's a woman in your bed and blah, 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 blah. You don't need that. It's like, no, you're in a different pattern now. Go away. So yeah, it does happen. And my advice for any lodge that's having that problem is don't first step into the heavy ritual banishment, blah, de, blah, de, blah. First sit down and think about why are they doing it. Not only because of what you're doing, which is very different, or you're missing something, but also are they clinging on, or are they trying to be helpful but are being unhelpful, or are they actually really trying to be helpful? And piece your way through. And 99% of the time, when it's just a clash of ideas, is to turn around to the person and just say, okay, we get it, but thanks, but no thanks. Can you leave and not come back? And if you can work in vision and ritual that way, 90% of the time they'll go, oh, well, fuck you then, and go. Sometimes it is to try and get a message through to you of a danger that they can see ahead, because don't forget, without a body, there's no time. In the pattern, it's all happening at once, and they can see things that you can't see, and they might be trying to warn you of something that they feel is important, and it might be important for you, it might not be important for you. It's a very complicated situation, but yeah, take it in stages. And if the fuckers still won't go and they're still causing trouble and there isn't a problem, because this is another thing, if you're running a lodge, you should have enough knowledge and skill to be able to divine properly forward to see, is there an issue ahead that they're trying to warn me of? If there is, through divination, you should be able to find out what that is and working in vision and then get it sorted. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be heading a lodge because you don't have the skill sets. And if there's no problem ahead, that's when you turn around and you say, right, I've told you to go and you will not go. You keep coming back. Come back again. We're locking you out permanently. And that's when you'd lock the doors to them and not let them in anymore. You see, it's not an easy question to answer because it could be so complicated. But yeah, it does happen. And it is fucking annoying. When I die, if I do turn up anywhere, just tell me to fuck off. Oh, and by the way, if Jake Stratton Kent is listening to this, Jake, every time I say fuck, you have to drink a shot, okay? He always has this competition of like, how many fucks can I get into half an hour? So, yeah, so he should be drunk by now. With this going back and forth, when over the last 10 years, I've had to have, a couple of major surgeries. So I've been under anaesthetic for hours and hours. In one of them, I come out of the anaesthetic, eventually got out of hospital. I was recuperating at home. And I had various emails from students, and not magical students, interestingly enough, from my ballet students, because I used to be a ballet trainer, from some of my ballet students from decades ago, going, oh, the other night I had a dream about you, and you suddenly turned up in my front room and said, right, you know that hip problem you're having? Well, it's because you're not having your heel to the front properly, and you need to get your alignment back. And if you stand up on that, stop sitting in your hip, pull out of your hip, pull yourself up, shoulders down, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I was giving them a technical lecture. And I was going around each person, and each of them are now their teachers and dancers who have been having injury problems. And I was going and giving them lectures. So it's the same sort of mechanism. And thankfully I wasn't annoying people too much. But it wasn't something I was aware of. I didn't, when I came out of the anaesthetic, I had no idea I'd been doing that. To me, I'd just been completely blank. I do remember for, 5 days after I was on heavy morphine of being in dream worlds where it was sort of my psychology and brain and things that were going on in the hospital around me and magical stuff and inner worlds all mushed in together. But I wasn't aware of actually going to people and giving them lectures. So, how much of conscious awareness there is when people do this, I don't know. So if I do turn up after I've pegged it and start giving people lectures, yeah, if it's annoying, just tell me to fuck off.
It's really ironic that you mentioned that, because as you were sharing that answer, I literally saw Jake Stratton Kent pop up on chat, and I passed along. I'm chatting right now with Josephine McCarthy. Is there, you need to take a shot for every time that she says the word fuck, and he says, please tell Josephine hi for me. It's been too long. And he says, ha ha ha. I'm in training, fortunately, but I doubt I'll cope with that. So,
oh, Jake, you're getting too old for it, boy.
That's right. Josephine's putting you in your place, Jake. So the next time.
I love Jake. He's awesome.
Yeah. Josephine, too, to your point, so this is another question from Annalise, but you were just mentioning about doorways and how, closing a doorway, obviously in very, very, very rare circumstances would you actually slam the door shut and it's an actual, banishing. But when you talk about doorways, Annalise says on page 122, Josephine, you talk about keeping a diary of our experiences, but you warn that we must be careful about what we write in our summary regarding the actual being and to not write descriptions that may create a doorway for them. And Annalise is saying, can you please share how writing a description would or could create a doorway, as it seems that if it were that easy, it'd be happening at an unprecedented level in society today. And also, how do you know before it's too late if we are inadvertently creating a doorway, and at what point is it too late?
It's an interesting question. In terms of doorways, images are far more dangerous than words. Words are far more dangerous than silence. And this is very specific for magic and exorcism, but in magical terms, when you write down or you paint, you create, it's a vessel, it's a creation. And this gets to the core of, this is Know Your Bible. Everyone in paganism throws the Bible out the window, and it's actually beyond the dogma and the strutting and everything else. There's also a lot of very interesting stuff embedded in there that when you've worked magic for a few decades, you start to say, oh God, yeah, I know what he's talking about. When you create, as a human, we mirror the creator. And I'm not talking about God as a dude on a throne with a white dress. I'm talking about the conscious patterns of creation. When you write something or you paint something, it becomes a vessel. And we're constantly creating and destroying all the time. Now, when you've come across a powerful being that's very specific and you write down a very tight description of it, you're basically, it's not the right word to say trapping it in those words. It's not. You're taking its phone number or a resonance of it. If you paint it, you've given it a doorway. You've given it a face. You've given it ears to hear, eyes to see. And a lot of this depends on your skill as a magician and your natural ability as a magician. A total beginner is probably going to do no harm to themselves whatsoever, writing down notes. As an experienced magician, you're taking a pattern of consciousness, you're putting it into an utterance, into words. Don't forget, this is how you create, you utter something into existence. You breathe something into existence. And then you're giving it a face by drawing a picture of it. And then you wonder why it's suddenly all around you and in your living room, because it's created a physical vessel for it to attempt to inhabit. With words, it's not so much an inhabitation of it, but a resonance of it. There are books like that, I will bring in the house will totally kick off. All the guardians will kick off because there's a resonance in the words in that book that are bringing something through in a fragment, in a very small way. So I have to take the book out and burn it. There are paintings or images that, find something in a junk shop and go, oh, this is really cool, and bring it in, and everything kicks off because it's a window for something. Something is coming through. That's how deity statues work. That's how, and a statue is more powerful than a painting. A painting is more powerful than the word. This is all worked with, like in the quarry training, they learn through all of the training, how this works, why it works, what you do, how you use it. And you can turn it to your advantage. But in terms of exorcism, if you've been working with something very dangerous and very powerful, you have to learn how to take your notes enough that you remember what you learned, what you observed, what you noticed, and what was the conclusion, without too much of a description. You need enough information and no more. And you don't fucking draw a picture of it. Just keep the actual minimum information. Don't give it a face that it can step through. And I was trying to explain this whole thing of, an image can be a doorway to someone, and they were just not getting it and not believing it. And they were a magician, they're a ceremonial magician. And I said, look, I'm going to have a look around your house and see if I can find a doorway. And this person lives in a different country, and he was totally flummoxed as to what I meant. I said, I'm going to find you in vision. Because you're talking to me, I have a link to you. I can get to you. I can look around your house, and I can see if I can find a doorway and look at you. So, he's like, all right, challenge accepted. So I went in vision to his house and looked around and found quite a lot of doorways that I could use, which were images of women's faces with eyes, ears, and nose, mouth. And so I got into one, and it's not like looking with your eyes into a room and seeing, the chairs, this, that, the other. I saw a person in that room. I saw a human pattern. Within that human pattern, I saw fire in a part of the body that was really not good to be there. So I came back out of vision and cleaned myself up, and then messaged him again. I said, right, you've got a picture in your front room of a woman's face, and I've just come through it and looked. And he was a bit taken aback because over his fireplace he did actually have this big painting of this woman, which weirdly enough actually looks a bit like me. He was on the back step a little bit with this one, like, okay. And I said, yeah, but I said, I couldn't see most things that are in your house. It don't work that way. I said, what I did see is you or some other person stood in that room, and they've got something going on with their colon, with their intestines, that is going to be quite dangerous. It's showing to me as a fire, but it's a fire that's condensing, which can set up a pattern eventually for cancer. It's like I was seeing quite an intense inflammation. What I was seeing was his friend, who was stood in doing something in the front room. The guy was in his office on the computer emailing me back and forth. And what I saw was his friend. His friend had like a Crohn's disease type of thing, but had a lot of bowel inflammation, and was not taking his medicine and not eating how he should do, and was basically trying to block himself up using codeine and things like that. And what it was doing was setting him up for colon cancer, which Crohn's normally doesn't cause. But the way he was approaching everything, it was like this whole bad situation was coming together. And so then I could email with this guy and say, look, I saw this. This is what you can do from a magical point of view. This is what you can do from a dietary point of view, and go back to your fucking doctor and stop taking codeine. get something that actually helps what you're doing instead of just papering over the cracks. A normal person, the stuff in your house, it's like it's whatever, it's just dead. When you're a magician, you're working with your consciousness, with your focus, with your intent. Things around you start to wake up. And so you do have to be slightly careful what you put in your house. It doesn't mean you can't have pictures of people or beings. It's just be aware that something can use that and bring that quality right into your physical space. From a Nexus point of view, you would be incredibly careful what you do with your note-taking and what you have in your house. As a magician, you would be slightly careful about your note-taking. Learn to get your own little vocabulary and learn to edit. It's like you don't need to tell everyone everything. It's the same thing. Learn to edit down, keep the necessaries. And, really, if you come up against something really not pleasant, don't draw a picture of it and then stick it on your wall, which I've seen people do. And eventually you learn, and again, this is in the Quarrier course, you learn how to turn that on its head so that you learn to work with pictures, with statues, with objects, to make them doorways and have beings work with that doorway as guardians so that they protect your space, and in return they get a window into the physical world, which is what they want. That's all they need. And you have to know which beings and how and things like that. But it is a mechanism that we're really not aware of in the modern world, which when you go back into older cultures, they were a bit more aware of. And you do still see it in the Far East in certain places as well. They will be quite careful about what they write, what they utter, what they paint, what they put on their walls, what they have in their house.
To that point, Josephine, we do have a question in terms of navigating not only individual cases, but this whole kind of architecture of hierarchies and different spiritual entities. This is a question, Josephine, from Firas KB, and Firas is asking, in your book, the Quarrier Apprentice Study Guide, you quote a verse from the Quran saying that, quote, God does not burden any human being with more than he is well able to bear. Allah the Most High speaks the truth, unquote. And Firas is asking, I'm wondering if you yourself believe that Allah is the Most High in the hierarchy, and if yes, how so? If not, with all these years of experience, what have you deduced about the hierarchical structure of the spirit world?
Oh, this is quite a difficult question because it's like trying to answer an Arabic question that's been asked in Spanish to someone who doesn't speak Arabic or Spanish. There's a lot of misunderstanding going on here. I use that quote because it's talking about a dynamic within MaGicK and it's within a context. And there is wisdom in religious writings all around the world. If you're willing to get over the dogma and the personal feelings that you have about religions. In terms of God, when people talk about God in the Abrahamic religions, for the most part, they have a humanized concept of an all-powerful male being sat on a throne deciding who does what, why, and when. That's the religion for the 5-year-olds. That's not when a magician says God, that's not what you're talking about. What you're talking about is the vast, conscious, creative intelligence process of creation and destruction of everything. God is within everything because God is everything. It's everything that's around you. And that understanding is within Islam as well as within Christianity, Judaism, and everything else. Always look to the mystics. Reading Ibn Arabi would be a good one for him to think about because this is some of the things that he actually addresses. So in terms of hierarchy is a human construct to try and put people in their place as to where do you belong. It is more of a male than a female thing, but it is very much within the education system for a very long time. It came into our sort of consciousness in probably about 300 BC, around that time, 200 BC, in Judaism and then is Christianity and subsequently Islam, you started to get hierarchies of angels, and then they got a name, and then they got a colour, and then they got a function, and the list goes on, and then they got an hour and a month and a day and an outfit and the whole thing. Before that time, you just said, when you're reading the texts, you hear angel, very dangerous, scary shit, keep out the way. That's it. They were talking from a direct experience point of view. As soon as you start seeing hierarchies and lists of deities, of angels, of all these different beings, what you're looking at is idiot speak, basically. An idiot speak that is functioning towards people who need to have lots of little boxes because they can't think or are not prepared to think about things in any way. It's like if you try boxing everyone that you know really well, it's actually quite difficult to box people in a structure, in a hierarchical structure, because people are complex. We're all very, very complex. The inner worlds are very complex. Beings are very complex. The Egyptians had a better way of looking at it. Is to them everything was nether. Everything was a being. Everything was a spirit. It was a god. It's a bad god, good god, in between gods, good and bad god, don't know god, spirits that were sort of gods, not quite gods. They didn't make the distinctions that we do. So all the words really, angel, demon, spirit, fairy, make absolutely no sense. Those are our little boxes that we put beings into according to how they affect us. And then those hierarchies are then passed down, and people who read them and want to copy them and pass them on or teach them, who have no direct experience, will make it more complex because it makes them sound more clever. And so it goes on. There is no human God. What you have is intelligent, conscious creation, destruction. Does that have a hierarchy? Well, look out the window. How can you put everything that you see out of the window into a hierarchy? How can you give it a level? Where do you put the insect over the house, the tree, the aeroplane flying past? How do you put that together? So there isn't a hierarchy. And in terms of, that whole quote, and why I put the whole quote is because I am quoting a piece of writing from the Quran, and I am trying to use that quote to teach a concept while respecting that writing and that quote. And Allah the Most High speaks the truth is like Amen at the end of a prayer. It is something when it's saying, this is a wisdom that comes from God. This is true. So you honor whenever you, as a magician, are writing something or passing something on and you're taking it from a religion directly, is you say where it comes from and you do it verbatim, because you can often also fuck up the meaning by changing it a little bit without realizing. You quote it exact with the same respect that it was first written down with, because it's a written window of understanding. It's not just words. Remember back to, writing the experience in the exorcism. When you pass that writing on, God does not burden any human being more than he is well able to bear. Allah the Most High speaks the truth. That is a window for consciousness and wisdom to flow through. It's a teacher. It's more than just words on a page. So, doesn't mean I'm Muslim. Doesn't mean that I have a hierarchy. And also, just in case people don't realize, Allah means God to any religion, to Christian, in Judaism. It means exactly the same thing. Christians in the Near East call God Allah because it means Allah in Arabic, and that is the language that they speak.
That might go to Firas's second question, which is, what do you personally think about the idea of having, quote unquote, several gods? Do you think that there is a one God that everything springs from? And if yes, is it a disgrace to the one God to call the others gods also? Such as, would it be to refer to the citizens of a kingdom as individual kings? I mean, what is your whole take on that, Josephine? Because as you mentioned, a lot of this is about, it's not just words on a page, it's how you perceive and work with that beyond any words.
Yeah. Well, again, it's back to the hierarchy and the dogma. You know, in a religion, there's a set dogma. It's a set way of thinking. You don't know any different, so your whole consciousness is geared around that. And then when you step into MaGicK and realize it's not actually like that, it can be a bit of a shock. It used to tickle me when I was at school. If you're Catholic, you should have understood this. Before confirmation, you know, you have to go through all these classes, and the bishop comes and before the confirmation and listens into all your answers and questions and blah, 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 blah that you've been doing for months and months with the nuns on wheels. The nuns are showing the children off to the bishop, and it's like having God come and visit, having the bishop come and visit. And he was asking, do you have questions? And I had quite a few. And I ended up actually stood in disgrace under the clock, which is where we used to have to stand if we were really bad. One of the things I'd asked was, there's only one God. Yes, there is only one God. So why does God say in the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me? Well, if there's no other gods, why does he even mention it? There was this stunned silence. And so I thought, right, I'll get the second question in before I get blown up and say, and wasn't Jesus a Jew? Out! That was it. When I eventually got confirmed, I was heartily slapped across the face by the bishop because he's supposed to tap your cheeks. He really went for it, nearly knocked me off the altar.
Oh, jeez.
That was his revenge. But yeah, again, if you're thinking of God as a human who's a god and sat on a chair in heaven directing everything, and that there are these other gods in different places around the world, who's top god and who's bottom god, it's getting out of that dogmatic childhood thinking and stepping forward into maturity and actually looking at what is there. And I often, when I'm in Quarrier, we look at all three Abrahamic religions, and we look at some Sumerian stuff. We read Greek philosophy, we read the New Testament. We look in great depth at a lot of Egyptian stuff, because the Egyptian magical system was extremely stable of all the ones that have survived. And when you start to look very carefully at the deities, because we're programmed, you put a god or a goddess in front of you, you're given a list of attributes, you take it on board, and that's it. Off, you're good to go. You got your altar, you give you this, blah, 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 blah. What you don't realize is that deity is a force of nature, and that we have put a physical image, a window together to allow that force of nature that's conscious, that's intelligent, to communicate and interact with us, and that we can communicate and interact with them. All it's doing is tuning a radio. I remember having a talk with a Kabbalist guy, very interesting young man. We were talking about this, and his way of putting it struck it absolute perfect vocabulary, which I borrowed from him ever since, which is, think of substations. If you have the conscious, intelligent creation that is everything, both creation, destruction, stasis, everything, that as God, then the powers of nature, the gods, as in male and female, are the substations, bringing it down with fuse boxes, bringing it down. And we talk about this again a lot in the course further on, is they learn to look at, what is a complete deity, a complete substation? What is a subdivided deity where the destructive and creative elements have been separated out, so it becomes two deities, the positive and negative? How do you work with that? The Egyptian method is brilliant for that sort of thing. And you can learn a lot if you can step back from any dogmatic thinking and look at the rise and falls and how they formed different families of deities according to different regions. They basically had different creation myths, sort of similar but different, according to the little communities that sprang up. it's fascinating to see how they did it. And that's back to, working with the images and statues and little porcelain dogs and things like that in your house, is that it's all the same mechanism. The whole of creation, from the vast universe through to the cells in your body, all work around the same sort of pattern and laws. And same in magic, same in religion, same in physical existence. Everything it's very well done. Everything's recycled. It's like a primary code that sort of reconstitutes itself in smaller and smaller parts. You learn about how to bring a protective spirit into a little porcelain dog and have it guard your door and bark and tell you in your mind and your sleep when there's danger coming, and to growl into the mind of the other person. Once you've learned how to do that, you've learned how to talk to a deity in a statue. Once you've learned how to talk to a deity in a statue, you've learned how to create a window. And once you've done that, you learn how to physically make your own window for a deity. And through doing that, you start to understand how to converse with the elements that are the power that flow into that window. That statue is not the god. The statue is like a telephone. So when the guy's talking about hierarchies and different gods, it's more like not, citizens of a kingdom as kings. It's like having a kingdom where the citizens have different phones that connect them to different powers that they can talk to.
That's a really, really good analogy, and I really hope that, not only the questioner, but everyone else really picks up on that, because you're right. It just seems like that's one of the big points that's just constantly overlooked, and I'm totally guilty of this, right? It's just a natural thing about identifying patterns and saying, okay, this falls into all the neat little boxes, and this is the stratification that I'm going to approach every single encounter with, and that just completely falls apart, is what you're saying, as soon as you start doing practical things.
Same in everyday life. You see lots of kittens and they're so cute, and you want a kitten, and you live in this small apartment and you go buy a kitten and it's so cute, and you got the catlet and you got the biscuits and you got the toys and you got everything. And then 3 weeks later it's shat everywhere, it's peed all over the carpet, it's ripped your curtains to pieces, it's knocked everything over, it's bouncing on your head at 3 o'clock in the morning because it's a kitten, it's a child. That's what kids do. That's the reality of having a kitten. If you're fine with that, that's fine. If you pay attention and learn how to maneuver and negotiate around that, that's fine. But yeah, practicalities. It's always real. The real thing is always really messy. And there's always deities that piss on the carpet, so you've got to be ready for it.
Talking about the effects of things, we do have a question from Johannes Farr, who is asking, what most endeared me to you, Josephine, was that you write about the physical and mental effects of doing magic. I can't think of any other author that really explores it in depth. Are the insights you bring yours alone? Have you found these physical and mental effects to be universal, or do the physical reactions vary from person to person? And earlier you were mentioning, for example, with female practitioners, almost always 90% of the time tends to be physical. With male practitioners, if there's some kind of encounter, it'll usually hit them mentally. But can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is this a pretty universal thing in terms of the effects?
I don't know. I've not been around the whole universe. I've not spoken to every magician in the universe, so I don't know. The insights come from my experiences and from having to deal with lots of other magicians over decades have been impacted as well. Again, it all goes down to, it's not like you're going to do a little ritual and your head's going to fall off. But when you get deeper and deeper into magic, if you think you're going to be able to do heavy, powerful magic without having impact, then you're an idiot, basically. Think about when you do magic, it takes a lot of energy. Magic comes through your body. It comes through you before it goes out. It affects the physical body, it affects the mental part of you, it affects every single layer of you, which is why you be careful and sensible about what you do in the most balanced way you can. You'll still fuck up. You'll still make mistakes. And then there comes a time as an adept where you make specific choices knowing that something is going to affect you in a certain way. But yes, powerful magic will affect you. It's not a dead rule with the male-female thing. It's just from what I've seen, impacted magicians that are impacted mentally, the majority of them that have come to me with that are men. There's been some women, but a lot more men. With the physical impacts of people that have come to me for help, it's been the women more than the men. But the men, it doesn't mean that they can't be physically affected, and they do get physically affected. It's just that for some reason, and I don't understand why, from what my experience and people coming to me, that's what I've seen. It might be different the rest of the world, but with everyone that's come to me, that's what I've come across. And it varies. Sometimes it's, when it first happens to someone, it can be a shock and very frightening. But then when you sit and explain what's happening, why it's happened, how it's happened, what it's doing, what you can draw from it, and how you can put yourself back in as good a position as you can, you're always going to have some sort of scar from it. You learn a lot by putting yourself back together, and my job is not to put someone else back together or fix them, which is what I thought was my job, 20 odd years ago, and I've learned through experience that's not actually what I should have been doing. What I should have been doing is first saying it's okay, you're not going to drop dead. Second, yes, I understand what's happened and why it's happened, but you need to understand how and why. And then these are the things that you need to start doing to start bringing yourself back up to an energetic and physical health level. And then from there, learn from this experience. Don't make the same mistake again. Make a different mistake so that you're constantly learning. And eventually, if you're stupid like me, you make a lot of different mistakes and have a lot of different scars from it. You eventually learn what not to do and why not to do it. But then when you turn around to a young person and say, well, that's really not a good idea to do that, they think that you're being like, well, I can do what I want. I'm grown up now. And you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, hey, knock yourself out. Just don't email me in a year. People still won't listen, so they have the lesson to learn, and they will learn a harsh lesson. Some survive it, come out the other end of it, and some don't. That's the sad part, is that, if somebody decides to go whole hog on something magically, despite all the warnings, then, it's like playing Russian roulette with real bullets and a real gun to your head. You don't know which of those actions are going to take you out, and it can. And, this is not drama. This is not fantasy. I've been there. I've seen it more times than I want to see it. I've had to deal with bereaved families more times than I want to because of someone literally blowing themselves up with MaGicK. Going mad and never being able to recover from it is a big one that happens a lot. Totally losing it and never finding their way back. So that's it. They're fried for the rest of their lives. They're going to be on antipsychotics and God knows what else for the rest of their lives. Physical injuries, this is, with me, I've had various physical injuries. I've had to have surgeries because of the physical injuries that have come from MaGicK. Some of them are from being stupid and ignorant, and some are from knowing that that was going to happen, but knowing that that work really needed to be done anyway. And again, this is written into the course. Right from the beginning, the safety mechanisms first to protect the toddler as they start working through. And eventually they start to learn how to maintain their own body and to look for the signals, to learn to pay attention and look for the very tiny signals that something is not right so they can stop something straight away. And to learn how not to do things. And also to learn if you have to do something and it is going to physically injure you, then this is how you can stay alive beyond that and keep on your feet and keep going. Reactions, they do vary from person to person. Beyond the sort of polarized thing of the mind and the body. It all depends on the MaGicK. It depends on what the injury comes from. Does it come from you doing MaGicK? If so, what type of MaGicK? Is it from a magical attack that you're injured? That sort of thing. There are different physical reactions that can happen according to what the work has been. So, for instance, if somebody's been, and this has happened a couple of times, where somebody's been magically attacked, I can tell from the physical reactions that they're having from the attack what MaGicK was used and how it was done. Because some MaGicK will favour some parts of the mind and body that other magic wouldn't, for instance. And I'm not going to go into what, because that information can be misused by a moron to use in an attack. It's like symptomatic viruses. When you get a virus, there are certain symptoms that are across the board of a primary immune reaction, sneezing, running nose, feeling cold, having a fever. That could be anything. Having certain rashes come up in certain places is indicative of a certain virus. So you know exactly what virus you're dealing with according to what the rash is doing and how it looks, how it's presented, what did they feel before it presented. It's exactly the same in magic. Be it a magical injury or an attack, is often from a physical point of view with the symptoms, you can tell what type of power it was, what type of accident happened. For instance, me doing the course, when I was writing the course, a lot of people don't realise actually how big the course is, because they go on the website and they do a few drop downs and look at a couple of lessons and go, oh, this is cool, I'll do this. And then they realise it's like, up to 17 years of work. In book form, it's 3 huge textbooks, of which virtually every page is practical or theoretical study. Doing that in 3 years was incredibly difficult, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because it was contacted writing. So what I would do each day would be, first deal with the temple structure that I'm working in, open all the gates, work in ritual vision, sit down, write, and do that every day. And I was working full time on it. I was doing between 40 and 60 hours a week, writing and editing. And the editing wasn't done contacted, but the writing was contacted. So I'm sat, basically it's like doing an 8-hour ritual every day. And I took 3 days off a month, every month, and that was it. That has a massive impact on the body. Not only are you sitting down all the time, but the energy that it takes magically to do that sort of stuff and bring that sort of stuff through. You're hungry all the time, you're cold and you're tired all the time because it affects the thyroid. It affects the inner energy because of the impact of the weight. When you start to write something that big, you often don't realise how big it's going to be, but it's already formed itself as an inner pattern. As soon as you engage with that pattern, you have the full weight of the full pattern on you. So I was holding the full weight of all of that work for 3 years. That impacts your body really badly. But I knew it had to be done. I knew the risks. I knew how to maintain myself through it, to get myself through it and get alive out the other end. But it did have a big impact on my body. I got huge. I put on like 40 pounds while I was writing the course. I got a physical injury while doing the latter end of the course, the adept section, which started out as an energetic injury and became a physical injury and became quite a bad physical injury. And they didn't realise how bad it was until they actually opened me up and it was like, fuck. So I had to have bone removed and stitched and, it was a proper physical injury. But also within all of that, a virus had gotten into the injury in a very, very unusual way. That's one of the magical indicators. So it made it really complicated. And that's all done now. That's all taken care of. And I'm fine, fit, healthy, strong as an ox. Because I knew it was coming. I knew I would have to go through that. I knew how to mop myself up afterwards. And you have to have the discipline to be able to do that. So, it's not just a matter of knowledge. It's practice. Can you hold that amount of pressure and power for 3 years? When you come out of that, can you mentally and physically then engage the discipline to start putting all the bits back together again, which can be very difficult? Do you have the staying power to deal with the physical impacts that need repatching, like injuries, and all the pain that goes with it, and not disappear down a hole of painkillers, alcohol, everything else? MaGicK is very physical as well as very mental. And the mental stuff was weird. There was some stuff that I'd never experienced before while I was doing a section of the course. And bearing in mind, I was also going through menopause while I was doing the course. One day, it was like, okay, I've done all this work. I need to go to the post office. I'd been writing for about 7 hours. I got out the door and I'm walking to the post office and I suddenly realised my mind was going, you are now walking down the road. There is a tree to your left. there is a car. And it's like, what the fuck? I was depersonalizing. And it was the pressure from the piece of work that I'd been writing for a week. So I recognized it straight away. This is why you have to learn to pay attention. That was the first time it happened. I picked up on it straight away, knew exactly what was happening, and then knew how to deal with it to block it and stop it. And what was happening was my mind and my chemical structure of my mind was becoming unbalanced from the pressure of the work. So straight away, I had to stop what I was doing and deal with that and deal with it magically. And I respond really well homeopathically with stuff like that. Take the remedies I need, take the herbs that I need, have the rest, have the ritual cleansing, take a day off, be ready to focus. And that was it. It dealt with it. That was from an utterance. It's the power of utterance. The power of utterance really gets into the mind and can do damage. The utterance is also the sword. The sword and the utterance is also what's used to destroy as well as teach and protect, which is why it's one of the most destructive attack tools. That was what I was working around and explaining and everything. So it triggered the pattern. I had another week of writing of that stuff to do. So it's like, oh shit, and because it was the latter end of the course, I was getting, really tired. The last 3 months was a hell of a push. And this is, again, paying attention and thinking sideways. Don't think in boxes. Thinking in boxes traps you in magic. Think sideways. I thought, okay, I need to do something about this. I can't go to a doctor and get any medication for this because it will block the writing. So I need to deal with it myself in a way that doesn't allow me to unravel and not realise I'm unravelling. There's a herb called Hypericum, St. John's wort, which is a brilliant magical herb. One of the things it does is works on serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain, or in the body in general. It can be used homeopathically or in a herb. The homeopathic version of it would not be the right frequency. It would actually block me from working, because homeopathy, which everyone misunderstands, is actually like, if there's anything that's magical alchemy, it's homeopathy. And if you know what you're doing with it really well, it's really fucking powerful shit. If you don't know what you're doing with it, it's absolute bullshit. Anyway, Hypericum. I knew that the homeopathic version would not be good, but the herbal version would be good. But the herbal version can often give you stomach acid, which would not be good because I've got a delicate stomach, because I'm a little delicate fairy. So I thought, okay, think logically about this. I need it to uptake through the abdomen, because the digestive system is the processing system of the utterance, magically. This is how you think outside the box. So the organ that could process this stuff is the digestive system, specifically the small and large intestine. You need something that will help that and trigger it to process while also feeding it at the same time. Hypericum as a herb is very much magically tied to swords and utterance. It's often used for very deep wounds that have, like needle wounds. If you stick a deep needle into, or stick a sword right into someone, what would have been used in days of yore would be Hypericum to start healing it, because it heals slowly, but it also works very well on nerve endings, head injuries, things like that. So I got a cream with Hypericum in it, and a very high quality one. Helios in London, helios.co.uk are my saviours. They're brilliant for all of these type of things. So I got some Hypericum cream, put it on my abdomen every morning. It absorbs through the skin. The Hypericum can be really easily uptaken subdermally. So you get it through the skin every morning. That's getting straight into the digestive system. It's also getting into everywhere else. You can feel it, which is why you can't use it if you're on antidepressants, because it'll give you serotonin syndrome eventually. You'll end up with too much serotonin in the system, which will basically fry your brain. It's quite strong stuff, so you don't play with it. But I put that on every morning. That was the end of the problem. This is, again, know your shit in magic. You need to know your herbs. You need to know your alchemy. You need to know homeopathic stuff. You need to know vision, everything. But also underneath all of that, pay attention. Watch, pay attention constantly, all the time. Be paying attention to things and putting the puzzles together and knowing what fits where and how things work with what. And that takes years. That's not something you can sit down, read books, take notes. You have to do it. It has to get right into you. So when you've been, uttered at really bad magically, one of the options for you, apart from the magical stuff you need to do, is also using Hypericum.
And if you know what you're doing, which is really, I know one of the big themes, Josephine, that you're constantly talking is you got to know your shit. You got to know what you're dealing with and what works.
Well, that's why I wrote the course, because I was sick of, years and years of emails every day, and everyone would head it. This is really important. This is really urgent. This is a terrible situation. Everybody's situation is terrible. I know. But, hundreds of people, I can't do that. I cannot do that. And now as an older woman, I'm not as young as I used to be, I also learned that you don't clear up people's shit. You give them a handbook on how to clear their own shit up. And so writing the course is so that people can learn all of this. And it's not a study course where you sit and read books. I mean, there is some book reading in it, but it's actually doing, which is much harder. It's really interesting watching people developing in the course, because the ones that come in and think that they can read a few books and, sit down and meditate a couple of times and that they're going to come out in 2 years as being an adept, watching the reality dawn on their faces is beautiful. When they realize just how much work it is, how much sacrifice has to go into it, how much physical effort has to go into it, as well as study. The thing is that, people say, how can you put all of that out there magically exposed? You don't need to hide anything. People will edit themselves. If it's too much for them, they just can't cope with it and they'll back away from it. People will take what they need from it and then leave. People that will take what they need and stay and work until they've got where they need to go. That's what it's there for. That's why it's free. So there's no pressure on me or on anyone else. That's how it should be. It's all their own path. And all I do, once they get to the sort of the middle of the course, I start mentoring, just guiding and mopping up the pee on the carpet every so often, just to get them through. But it is your own work. You have to do it right from day one. When you come out the other end of that, you know when something happens, what it is, where it comes from, what to do about it. And if you don't, you have a good idea, and then you'll figure the rest of it out for yourself, and then you'll take notes and pass that on to the future for other people. And this is the whole thing about Quoria, is that there is no barrier. There's no monetary barrier. There's no, you have to be a this, that, and the other to join us. There is nothing like that. There's nothing to join. You just do it. It freaks people out because they have to pay. I have to pay. It's like, fine, donate. We always need money to do projects. That's fine. But that stays up there for free, forever, for people to use, so that they can do this, they can find this for themselves, so they don't come fucking knocking on my door when they've peed on the carpet. I can just say, here, there's the manual for how to clean the pee up, get on with it.
I know that many listeners have checked it out. I really encourage people to, as you mentioned, really understand the gravity of it in terms of how it's very comprehensive and the years and years and years potentially that one should spend on it. And to that point, Josephine, we do have a few questions from Frater Ashen Chassan about this very topic, who's asking, what has been one of the most amazing experiences you've had since releasing the Quoria courses? And also, he's asking, what would you say are your overall goals for your current magical courses and studies?
Well, there is only one course. It's just really big. The most amazing experience has been seeing people engaging with it and then seeing the light dawn when they do things and it works. And they get really excited and they come back and go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's like, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. It's really cool. And seeing how it's changed people. And, people as well coming up and saying, well, it's not my path, but I found this and this really useful. This section and that section have really changed how I approach my own magic. That is amazing. I love it to see how it's being of use and it's being used. That's great. My overall goals are just to make sure that it stays up, that it stays free, that it stays accessible, for whoever needs to. And that's it, really. And that one day it will become obsolete because people will have developed enough that they can look back on this sort of work and go, oh my God, it's so old-fashioned. We need to do another one. And it's done its job. Then it's achieved what it was meant to achieve.
Frauder's also asking, what do you feel are the biggest challenges for those studying MaGicK in current times? It's a very open-ended question, but it sounds like, I remember you delineating at the beginning a lot about it.
Yeah, media advertising, altered perceptions, self-image, you name it. You deserve it. You need an expert. Toys, fantasy. Yeah, those are all the big challenges. Modern life, but then that's life. Suck it up and get on with it.
Soviet Mercedes is asking, how do you deal, if at all, with people who doubt your work? I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that, but let's just leave that out there. And then tell them to fuck off. That's what I thought. And then Soviet Mercedes is also asking, what was the most impactful change that you've made that influenced your work?
Divorce. Not Stuart. He's the perfect male. He's lovely. He's absolutely wonderful. Now, I've had a few husbands. I tend to work my way through, I used to work my way through husbands because I don't take crap. It's, in seriousness, the most impactful change that has influenced my work was getting a divorce. Stepping into who I am, into not being it. Again, if you grew up in a Catholic community, although in America it might be different, I grew up sort of in the 60s in, Irish Catholic family, north of England, very sort of old-fashioned, traditional. Women were meant to have babies. You're meant to get married and get babies. I was told at 19 that I was going to be a spinster if I didn't hurry up and get married because all my sisters got married at 16. And you're brought up, even though in the school I went to a convent school from 10, and they were brilliant. The sisters there were really good, and they were very much about you can be whatever you want to be if you work hard. And you focus and you work hard and you set a goal, you go for it. They were very good like that. But at the same time, there was also this narrative of, well, you have to get married and do what your husband says and everything revolves then around your husband. And that is still within the culture. It's like when I first moved back to Britain, 2008, it was asking, I was filling in forms, am I a Miss, a Mrs. or a Ms? It's like, the fuck has it got to do with you? A guy is just Mr. What the fuck? And it just, then when Stuart and I got married, suddenly my car insurance became his and it was all for Mr. And so that's what your consciousness grows up in. And I'd carried that into a magical relationship, that you're there to prop up the male. You're there to make them look good. You're there to make sure that they're fed, their clothes are clean, their paperwork's done, all of this sort of stuff. You don't realize, and you feel yourself being destroyed in the middle of all that. And there's no innocence. In my divorces anyway, there is no good and bad. There's no innocence. There's equal on either side. But yeah, the one thing that came from that divorce, or from this magical divorce, was, you know what? I am who I am. I do what I do. It's my work. I am a magician in my own right. And I do not have to stand in the shadows to make somebody else look good. Fuck that. And that just freed a load of stuff up, and all the work came flowing in for me to work with, because I'd been blocking so much, not purposely, but by filtering all the time, well, will this person like this to work with? Will they like that to work with? Well, they may not, this might make them angry, blah, 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 blah. This is in my 20s, so 20s and 30s. It took me a long time to grow up, basically, and realize that that's all just bullshit. And that was the turning point that influenced the rest of my magical life. And since then, nobody has been allowed to step in front of my magical path and interfere with it. Nobody. That is the one thing I will not allow. I don't care who the fuck they think they are. I will massacre somebody who tries to step in front of my path and interfere with it in that way. It's all from that. So yes, that was the most impactful change.
I love how you phrased that, Josephine, a couple minutes ago when you mentioned that even by just deciding to do something, that in and of itself is a magical act, because you are going forward, you are taking your life into your own hands.
Yeah, yeah. And it just took me a lot. I mean, today's women tend to be a lot more clued in than I was. Each generation of women seem to be getting more clued in. You know, yes, there's good and bad and blah, 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 but in general, they're more aware of this sort of stuff, which I wasn't. I was a bit dumb. So I put up with a lot of shit for a long time. And they got a lot of shit back as well. You know, it certainly wasn't one-sided. It's different for every person, but there is usually a point in your life where you do a 180-degree turn and go, you know what? This is how my life is. This is where it's going, not there. And that could be anything from a little thing to a big thing.
Kalan de la Luna is asking, what is your understanding of adepthood or similar concepts, and what is your best advice for the seeker working towards adepthood?
Well, being an adept just means that you've acquired, either through your own work or through training, that you've got to a certain level of skill. So, like, you know, a ballet dancer in a ballet company would be an adept of ballet. So to me, magically, it's, you know, if you have good functioning skills that you really understand in all these different areas of magic, then that's adepthood. If somebody's seeking towards adepthood, don't think in terms of, well, I have to do exams, I have to get a badge or a sash or this hierarchy or, you know, blah, 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 blah. That's joining a club. And it can be very nice and everything else, but that's not adepthood. Adepthood is experience and work and knowledge. And that comes with time, and it takes decades. You cannot be an adept in 3 years or 5 years. But if you want to seek towards adepthood, start working. Get off your ass and start working. There's a course out there. There's lots of courses out there. There's everything out there on the net, for fuck's sake. For the first time in human history, you are surrounded by every single drop of knowledge. All you have to do is get off your ass and begin. And then look at adepthood as something for the rest of your life that you're walking towards. You don't get there. You are never a finished adept. You are always in that process. You are always learning. Always. And if you're not, there's something fucking wrong with you, or you're a stupid bastard. So,
Quaria, it's incredibly amazing course. I've only scratched the surface of it, but I definitely encourage listeners to check it out. Where else, if listeners are wanting to read a little bit more about yourself, your works, the course, obviously, is there anywhere else that you want to point them after they listen to this and if they want to learn more?
There's Quaria.com. There's JosephineMcCarthy.com, which is my blog. There's this thing called Google, which is really cool. You can use that. I'm really not good at the marketing thing, so I don't know what you want to know. But yeah, there's Quaria.com, JosephineMcCarthy.com. The rest of it, figure it out for yourself. If you can't figure it out for yourself, you shouldn't be reading the fucking books in the first place.
Josephine McCarthy, thank you just so much for the gift of your time and also your badass expertise and wisdom. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, listeners, I don't know about you, but my magical journal was on fire from taking notes from the chat with Josephine on all of the different ways that we can take magical practice to the next level. I mean, we all can't be as badass per se as people like Josephine McCarthy or Meredith Graves or others, but we can at least try, right? Also, supporters of Glitch Bottle on Patreon can hear even more exclusive bonus content from Josephine and all of our guests. And to all the great Glitch Bottle patrons out there, thank you so much for your support in growing the show and helping it go in new and interesting directions. You can always subscribe to Glitch Bottle as well on YouTube, youtube.com/glitchbottle, as well as find Glitch Bottle on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker.com, and Stitcher Radio. As always, this is Alexander Eth reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.